to Noob-Splaining. My name is Wolf. If this is your first time here, this is where I explain the gloriously over-the-top world of Warhammer 40,000 that nerds like me love so much. So hit that subscribe button, grab a drink, settle in, and prepare for a Noob-Splaining session. And welcome to this week's video. Now this is a new series where we start taking a little bit of a deeper look into the collecting and playstyle of each faction. The format of these videos will be a quick reminder of the lore, but if you need a full refresh, then go watch my other video on the faction. We're also going to look at what's in the combat patrol box, some suggestions on basic tactics for those units, the faction's unique rules and stratagems, and what I would suggest to buy next. The faction in question this week is the Sisters of Battle. So, quick recap on the Sisters of Battle's lore. They were originally a martial religious coven of women dedicated to Emperor Chris and constantly training in all forms of combat. Because they lived on a planet that would be barely classed as medieval in technology levels, they were easily tricked into the service of Goj Van Dyer and became his bodyguards and when required also his enforcers. This was alongside the army of the church. Goj, however, was a massive fucking nutjob and plunged the church into a civil war that eventually led to a final battle on Earth. Now, some Space Marines joined in on the assault to Goj's temple, but were held off by the Sisters, which really confused the Space Marines. Eventually, some Custodes turned up, wondering what all this ruckus is going on outside Emperor Chris's palace. The Custodes took the leadership of the Sisters to meet the Emperor. Now, nobody knows exactly what was said, but the leader of the Sisters promptly returned to Goj's palace and cut his fucking head off, so I imagine it wasn't good. The church was then banned from having men-at-arms, so using a loophole in the law, the Sisters of Battle became the church's army and has been expanding its ranks ever since. Now, onto the combat patrol box. So, in the Sisters combat patrol box, you get a lot of models. This is both a good and a bad thing. Now, each of the combat patrol boxes are somewhat balanced. Anyway, back to this box. Lots of models means you're saving lots of money. But it also means the models are cheap points-wise, so the vast majority of your models are probably not going to last the full game. Now in the box you get the following: 1 Canoness, 10 Battle Sisters, 1 Repentia Superior and 4 Sister Repentia, 5 Seraphim, 3 Arco Flagellants, 1 Rhino and 1 Penitent Engine. The main thing that jumps out here is you get both a transport and a dreadnought type vehicle, as well as both melee and range troops, so a nicely balanced army in a box. So let's take a look at the units in more detail and see how they interact with each other. So the Canoness is obviously your army leader, and she is geared up mainly for melee combat, equipped with a bolt pistol and a chainsword, but with options to change both out. Now if you're going to put her in the squad of Battle Sisters, then you want to swap her bolt pistol for the Condemner bolt gun. That is anti-psyker, devastating wounds, precise and rapid fire, so way better than a standard bolter. Alternatively, keep her out the squad and equip her with a plasma pistol and blessed swords and have her go chop motherfuckers up in melee. With 4 wounds, a 3+ save and a 4+ invulnerable, plus a move of 6, she should be in combat by turn 2. There are a few other options for war gear, but they seem a bit meh to me, so I'm not going to explain them all. Next we move on to the Battle Sisters. These are the basic line infantry of your faction, so keep them out of melee combat. They have a 24-inch range on their bolters, so move them up into firing range, plant their feet, and get shooting at other infantry, maybe characters. The leader of the squad has some options on different weapons, but that's mainly going to buff them in for melee combat. Now you can equip up to 2 of the sisters with better weapons. One gets to use a flamer or a melter gun. Flamers are good against light infantry, melter guns against heavy infantry, characters and some vehicles, but both again have a 12-inch range, and to get the best out of the melter against tougher units you need to be at a 6-inch range, and this is then risking melee combat. There is also the option of an Artificer bolt gun, which if you're not taking one of the other 2 options, then you might as well take that for the extra attack and damage it does. A second sister also gets the same option, but she can also choose to take a heavy weapon instead, with your choices being the heavy bolter, heavy flamer or multi-melter. In this case, forget the heavy flamer as the heavy bolter does roughly the same thing, but has a 36-inch range. Now the multi-melter will fuck up most vehicles and characters, but again to get the best out of it, you need to be within 9 inches. So although a range unit, you're going to have to be aggressive with their movement. Now, the Repentia squad. This is pretty much purely a melee squad. In fact, it's only the leader who has a pistol. In fact, it's mainly a suicide squad, as they're going to get shot to shit before they make it across the battlefield. But then, when they do, if they can charge an enemy, they will do some serious damage, especially with those big eviscerator chainswords. Just don't expect them to survive the battle, so play them with that thought in mind. They are, in lore, trying to redeem themselves through martial combat for some past transgression anyway, so charge them in like berserkers. The Seraphim Squad. Okay, this is your fast movers, but are also mainly ranged. Kind of. There are also no slouches in melee either, so if you can attack an enemy's weak squad in melee, do it, but primarily you want to be zipping these units around the battlefield with their move of 12-inch and using their jetpacks. You want to be annoying the fuck out of your opponent, keeping the attention on the Seraphim Squad. What's more, after they have shot, if they are not in engagement range, they can then move another 6 inches. Armed with dual bolt pistols, they only have 12-inch of combat range, so bear that in mind. With a 3+ save and a 5+ invulnerable, don't be afraid to get stuck in, but don't put yourself in front of your enemy's big guns. The main purpose of these girls is to zip around and take up your enemy's concentration and distract them from the fight while you're moving the rest of your army up. The 3 Arcoflagellants, again, a purely melee suicide squad. In lore, they are brainwashed into being berserkers, and you can increase their attacks from 4 to 6, but risk losing models due to the hazardous rule. However, these 3 alone, with the attacks of 6, could potentially rip a Space Marine squad apart in one turn. The Rhino. Nothing special here, it's just a run-of-the-mill Rhino with a 24-inch range Storm Bolter, but it does repair 1 wound per turn. But that is neither here nor there, as most anti-vehicle weapons are aiming for 4 to 6 damage per shot. So with its 14 wounds, chances are it won't heal enough to last an extra turn. The good news, however, it's a transport, and I would suggest cramming the Flagellants and the Repentia in it, charging the Rhino across the battlefield into the enemy's biggest, toughest or long-range damage infantry unit and throwing both squads into melee combat with them. They should cut them down in one turn, leaving you then free to go on a bloody murderous rampage with both squads for the rest of the game. The Penitent Engine. This is basically a weaker version of every other faction's Dreadnought, but that doesn't mean it's not dangerous, it just lacks a lot of range firepower. It does have a couple of flamers, so a short range of 12-inch to deal with light infantry, but that's it on ranged. However, its primary job is to use its big buzz saws with its massive strength 10 to open up vehicles, characters and heavy infantry in that order. And when I say open them up, I mean violently. Alternatively, you can swap the buzzsaws for flails for double the amount of attacks but half the strength. So then you're looking at target priorities of light infantry, weaker characters, then heavy infantry, and finally some of the tougher characters. But you're not going to do much damage to vehicles with those flails. Either way, again, it's primarily a melee unit, so get it up and in the enemy's face before it's destroyed and watch it tear the enemy to shreds. Overall, this combat patrol box has a lot of money's worth of models in the box, so it's a bit of a bargain, but all those models are either melee or short range weapons, and with the sisters not being the toughest, expect some losses before you even get into combat, but once you do, they can easily tip the balance back again. You're going to need to be very aggressive getting across the battlefield and into position, but you also need to use the terrain to mitigate losses, so this will take some practice. Their unique rule is the Miracle Dice, which allows you to replace a single dice roll per phase with one of your pre-rolled Miracle Dice, which is kind of like the Eldar Fate dice. At the start of each turn you roll a dice. Whatever it lands on is your Miracle Dice and move it into the separate Miracle Dice pool. If a unit is destroyed, you also gain another Miracle Dice. The Battle Sisters get to use a Miracle Dice and then replace it once per phase using their Cherub, plus they get to add a Miracle Dice to the pool every time they destroy an enemy unit. So use that to your advantage as well. Now you can use one Miracle Dice to replace one dice roll per phase. So shooting, for example, if the 10 sisters shot, you can choose one miracle to replace one shot and must roll the remaining 9d6. That Miracle Dice is then removed from your pool. They have 6 stratagems, but they don't really jump out at me. In fact, rather than going through it all, I'm just going to pick the best 2. They have one that allows you to sacrifice 1 to 3 Miracle Dice to put any other character back on the table that has been killed with 1 to 3 wounds. They have one that allows you to control the combat when you have 2 units attacking an enemy. So if you use my tactic of stuffing everything in the Rhino and then having the Repentias and Flagellants jump out on a unit, you can make that enemy unit target either the Repentias or the Flagellants, not both. As for the rest of the stratagems, nothing really impressive in there. Perhaps maybe the one that gives them +1 to the roll to wound in melee combat, but apart from that, not a lot else. Now, I will admit, I've not had much experience playing with or against sisters, but I do know enough about the game to make a good conclusion, just looking at the stats on the units. So, here it is. This combat patrol is a very aggressive rush-in-your-face army, with some strong melee and very strong short-range weapons, primarily flamers and melters. What it is missing is some big fucking guns. So personally, I would add some Retributor squads who can be set up with heavy bolters for anti-infantry, or heavy melters for anti-vehicles and characters, but those melters have really short range. 18 inches but 9 inches to be really effective. So maybe grab another Rhino to get them in close, so you can unload them and then drop all that firepower on something. I'd probably also add an Immolator too, just so you can roll it up over the battlefield and burn the enemies, especially if you change its flamers for melters for the extra damage. Now there are lots of other options for more range damage and or more melee units, depending how you want to play, but bear in mind most of the Sisters' big guns require you being up close and personal, not sitting at the back with las cannons taking pot shots at things at massive distances. For a complete beginner, you're going to have to be both aggressive in movement while using as much cover as possible to mitigate losses, as I said, and you're also going to have to use your faster units to distract the enemy. It will be a little bit of a learning curve, but then you will soon pick it up. They are an aggressive, short-range and melee army that will take some losses and not be reduced in effectiveness that much compared to Space Marine losses, but you do need to get stuck in quick or you'll soon get overwhelmed. And there we have it. That brings us to the end of this video. If you laughed or learnt anything, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and if you are already subscribed, then don't forget to share this video with somebody who could do with some noob-splaining in their life. Also, leave a comment on your favourite part. I do try and interact with every comment. But if you made it this far, thank you, and I'll see you next time.